September 16th, 1992, a Wednesday morning in London. The sun rises over the city, and inside the Bank of England's marble fortress, the most powerful financial institution in Britain is about to fight a war it cannot win. On the other side of the Atlantic, in a Manhattan office overlooking Central Park, a 62-year-old Hungarian immigrant picks up the phone and gives an order that will change history. "Go for the jugular," he says. Within 24 hours, the British pound will collapse, the government will burn through $27 billion trying to defend it, and one man, George Soros, will walk away with $1 billion in profit, the single greatest currency trade in history, the day they call Black Wednesday. But here's what nobody tells you. Soros didn't break the system. He exposed it. The real scandal wasn't his trade. It was the lie Britain had been telling itself for years. And when that lie finally cracked, it took the entire economy down with it. This is the story of how one hedge fund manager went to war with a nation and won. George Soros wasn't born into wealth. He was born into chaos. Budapest, 1930. Jewish family, Nazi occupation, Holocaust survival, communist takeover. By the time he escaped to London in 1947, at age 17, he'd learned the most valuable lesson of his life. Survival depends on seeing the truth before everyone else does. After studying philosophy at the London School of Economics, Soros moved to Wall Street in 1956. He worked at various investment banks, learning the mechanics of global finance, but he wasn't interested in stocks or bonds. He was obsessed with something far more volatile and far more profitable: currencies. In 1969, Soros launched his own hedge fund. He called it the Quantum Fund. The name came from quantum mechanics, the physics of uncertainty. It was perfect, because Soros's entire strategy was built on one principle: find the moment when certainty becomes illusion. When governments, central banks, and entire nations convince themselves that something unsustainable can last forever, and then bet against them. By 1992, the Quantum Fund had grown to $15 billion under management. Soros was already legendary in financial circles, but he wasn't famous. Not yet. That was about to change, because Britain was lying to itself, and Soros knew it. To understand Black Wednesday, you need to understand the ERM, the exchange rate mechanism. This was Europe's grand experiment in the early 1990s. The idea was simple. European countries would link their currencies together in a fixed exchange rate system. This would stabilize trade, reduce currency volatility, and eventually pave the way for a single European currency, what would later become the euro. Britain joined the ERM in October 1990. The British pound was pegged to the German Deutsche Mark at a fixed exchange rate. If the pound weakened, the Bank of England had to intervene, either by raising interest rates to make holding pounds more attractive, or by buying pounds on the open market to prop up the price. Sounds reasonable, right? In theory, yes. In reality, it was a financial time bomb. Here's the problem. Britain's economy was in terrible shape. Inflation was high. Unemployment was rising. The country was sliding into recession. In normal circumstances, the Bank of England would have slashed interest rates to stimulate the economy. But they couldn't, because if they lowered rates, the pound would weaken. And if the pound weakened below the ERM floor, Britain would be forced to exit the system. That would be humiliating, a political disaster. So instead, the British government kept interest rates artificially high to defend the pound. This strangled the economy even further. Businesses collapsed, homeowners couldn't afford their mortgages, unemployment soared, and the entire time the government kept insisting, "We will defend the pound, we will stay in the ERM, whatever it takes." It was a lie, and George Soros could smell it. Throughout the summer of 1992, Soros and his chief strategist, Stanley Druckenmiller, watched Britain's economy deteriorate. They saw the numbers, they read the central bank reports, they analyzed the political rhetoric, and they came to one conclusion: the pound was overvalued, massively overvalued, and the British government couldn't defend it much longer. So they built a position, not a small bet, a nuclear bomb. Soros's Quantum Fund began borrowing billions of pounds from banks, not to invest, to sell. This is called short selling. Here's how it works. You borrow an asset, sell it immediately at the current high price, wait for the price to drop, buy it back at the lower price, return it to the lender, and pocket the difference. But Soros wasn't shorting stocks, he was shorting an entire currency. He borrowed £10 billion, yes, billion with a B, and sold them all for Deutsche Marks and dollars. If the pound collapsed, he could buy those pounds back for pennies on the dollar and make a fortune. If the pound held, he'd lose everything. It was the ultimate gamble. Soros versus the Bank of England. A hedge fund manager with $15 billion in assets versus a government with theoretically unlimited resources. Soros had something the British government didn't: the truth. By early September 1992, the pressure was unbearable. Currency traders around the world could see what Soros saw. The pound was doomed. Speculators piled in, hedge funds, investment banks, even retail investors. Everyone started shorting the pound. The British government tried to fight back. On September 15th, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, basically Britain's finance minister, went on television and declared, "We will do whatever is necessary to defend sterling." The next day, the Bank of England raised interest rates from 10% to 12%, a massive, desperate move. The message was clear: we will make it so expensive to bet against the pound that speculators will give up. But Soros didn't give up. He doubled down. September 16th, Black Wednesday, the day the war ended. The pound opened weak. Currency traders in London, New York, and Tokyo were all watching the same screens. The sell orders were flooding in faster than the Bank of England could absorb them. By mid-morning, the pound was in free fall. The Bank of England began buying pounds by the billions, literally shoveling money into the fire, trying to stabilize the price. Treasury officials were on the phones with major banks begging them to stop selling. The Prime Minister's office was in chaos. But for every pound they bought, Soros and thousands of other speculators sold 10 more. It was a flood, an avalanche. The bank was drowning. At 11 a.m., the Bank of England raised interest rates again, from 12% to 15%. 15%. Think about what that means. If you had a mortgage, your monthly payment would skyrocket overnight. Businesses couldn't borrow. The economy would implode. It was a suicide move, a signal of pure desperation, a dying animal thrashing in its final moments. And it didn't work. Currency dealers laughed at the announcement. "They're finished," one trader told Bloomberg. "This is panic," and he was right. By 2 p.m., the British government realized the truth. They couldn't win. The foreign currency reserves were almost gone. The political will was shattered. Cabinet ministers were screaming at each other in emergency meetings. The pound was finished. At 7:30 p.m., Norman Lamont, the Chancellor, stood in front of television cameras, looking like a man who'd just lost a war. He announced Britain's withdrawal from the ERM. The pound was allowed to float freely. Within hours, it collapsed by 15%, one of the largest single-day currency crashes in modern history. George Soros had won, the Bank of England had lost, and the bill, $27 billion in British taxpayer money, burned defending an unsustainable position. Soros's profit, $1 billion in a single day. The British press lost its mind. Headlines screamed, "The man who broke the Bank of England." Soros became an instant legend and a villain. Politicians blamed him for the crisis. The tabloids vilified him. The public was furious. How could one man bring a nation to its knees? But here's the thing. Soros didn't create the crisis. He just exposed it. The real culprit was Britain's stubborn refusal to face economic reality. The ERM was a political project, not an economic one. The government prioritized prestige over pragmatism. They kept interest rates high to defend the pound, even as it strangled businesses, destroyed jobs, and pushed families into bankruptcy. They lied to the public, insisting the system was sustainable when every economist knew it wasn't. Soros simply called the bluff. And when he did, the entire charade collapsed. In fact, and this is the ultimate irony, Britain's exit from the ERM was the best thing that could have happened to the economy. Once the pound was allowed to float, interest rates could finally be lowered, businesses could breathe, investment returned. Within 2 years, Britain was experiencing one of the strongest economic recoveries in its history. Black Wednesday, the day of national humiliation, turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Soros didn't destroy Britain, he saved it from its own delusions. But try telling that to a politician who just lost an election. So, how did Soros do it? What separated him from the thousands of other traders who saw the same opportunity? The answer is philosophical. Soros wasn't just a trader. He was a student of human behavior. His mentor at the London School of Economics was Karl Popper, the philosopher who developed the concept of falsifiability, the idea that the best theories are the ones that can be proven wrong. Soros applied this to markets. He developed a theory he called reflexivity. It's simple but profound. Markets aren't rational. They're driven by feedback loops. Perception influences reality, and reality influences perception. When everyone believes the pound is strong, they act as if it's strong, which makes it strong, until the belief cracks. Then the reverse happens. Panic feeds panic. Selling triggers more selling. The collapse accelerates. Soros's genius was recognizing when a system had reached its breaking point, when the gap between perception and reality became so wide that the slightest pressure would shatter it. On Black Wednesday, Britain's government was clinging to the perception that the pound was defendable. The reality was that it wasn't. Soros applied pressure. The perception cracked. Reality flooded in. It wasn't luck. It was surgical precision. After Black Wednesday, Soros became the most famous and most feared speculator on Earth. His name became synonymous with market-moving power. Governments trembled when the quantum fund took a position. If Soros bet against your currency, you were in trouble. In 1997, he did it again. During the Asian financial crisis, Soros shorted the Thai baht. Thailand's economy collapsed, then Malaysia, then Indonesia. Entire nations blamed him for their economic destruction. Malaysia's prime minister called him a moron and accused him of economic warfare. Soros didn't care. He made billions. But here's the paradox. Soros isn't a villain, he's a philanthropist. Since the 1980s, he's donated over $32 billion to causes around the world. Education, democracy, human rights. He funded anti-communist movements in Eastern Europe. He supported pro-democracy activists in authoritarian regimes. He built universities, hospitals, and libraries. The same man who crashed the British pound also helped topple the Soviet Union. So who is George Soros? A greedy speculator destroying economies for profit, or a visionary philanthropist using markets to fund global justice? The answer is both, and that's what makes him so fascinating and so controversial. Here's the real takeaway from this story. It's not about George Soros. It's about power and the illusion of power. The British government in 1992 believed it could control markets. It believed that political will backed by the authority of a central bank could override economic reality. They were wrong. Markets are bigger than governments. Always have been. Always will be. You can't defend an overvalued currency forever. You can't fight economic gravity. And when you try, someone like Soros will call your bluff and make $1 billion doing it. But the scariest part, this keeps happening. Argentina tried to peg its currency to the dollar in the early 2000s. Collapsed. Greece tried to sustain unsustainable debt levels in the Eurozone. Collapsed. Turkey tried to control its currency through political decree. Collapsed. Every single time, speculators saw the lie before the governments did. And every single time, the speculators won. Because markets don't care about pride. They don't care about politics. They care about one thing, reality. And reality always wins in the end. George Soros didn't break the Bank of England. He just held up a mirror, and when Britain looked into it, it saw the truth it had been denying for years. Black Wednesday wasn't a tragedy. It was a reckoning, a reminder that no government, no matter how powerful, can outrun the truth forever. And the next time a politician tells you they'll defend something at all costs, remember, George Soros is out there, watching, calculating, waiting for the lie to crack. Subscribe to Wealth Decoded, because the biggest fortunes are made by those who see the truth first, and we're just getting started.